Welcome back, wall crawlers, to my Mediocre Spider Show. It has been a little while, I know, but as I'm currently on the run from the villain of the week, it means it's a perfect time for me to whip out my handheld video game consoles and experience the many portable adventures of our favorite wall crawler, starting with the Amazing Spider-Man. This was published by our good friends down at LJN, how delightful, and webbed up Game Boy screens in 1990. Okay, first things first, the title screen and cutscenes are clearly modeled after McFarlane's Spidey, so why the hell does the front cover feature John Romita's? Pick an artist and an era and stick with it, LJN. You can have the 80s or the 90s, but you can't have both. Anyways, the story is surprisingly nuanced. Mary Jane has been kidnapped by the Sinister Six. Yeah, and that's the end of that sentence. What's odd about this is that all the villains, including this 5-year-old child wearing a scorpion costume, apparently know Spidey's secret identity as Peter-Man and call him up at his house via a two-way radio or walkie-talkie. Peter, already dressed in his heroic PJs, answers by saying, "Parker residence," which implies he's at Aunt May's, whereupon the villains just start trolling the shit out of him, saying he'll never get Mary Jane back, he's a failure of a husband, yada yada yada. Unfazed, Spidey then proceeds to ratio each villain during these calls, which occur after every level is completed. Just as our hero is cleaning the blood of the current villain off his hands, the next one just calls him up and the childish barbs start anew. All of these stages begin as a standard walk to the right, punch kick affair. Spidey can attack, shoot a web ball, and take to the air via swinging. Kinda. He's gonna need all these tricks as everyone in the Big Apple and their mother wants him dead. Random punks, people just looking outside their windows. Hey, it's that spider nerd, whack him! And of course, multiple lizard men, or maybe it's just Connors moving really, really fast, taking cheap, highly damaging swipes from under manholes. Your progress is soon impeded by two villainous boxes who block your path forward. Luckily, if you jump at a specific angle, this results in a much higher jump, which then initiates auto web swinging. Once you get to the end of the alleyway, it starts to explode for an extended period of time. Oh no, Mysterio! One of Spidey's most dangerous... Yeah, you just hit him with webs, and he's done. The game just cycles like this until the end credits. Walk to the right, fight a literal army of New York subway vampire bats, kill a villain, very simple stuff, as it should be. Remember, we be Game Boyin' right now, so there's no reason to overcomplicate things. Now, there are two wall-crawling sections thrown in, which does help break up the monotony, and they're not incredibly hard either, until you run out of resources, that is. Now, when I say resources, I mean your 3 lives, 3 continues, and 0 passwords. Lose everything, and it's back to the title screen, forever leaving Mary Jane to her unknown but assuredly grisly fate. As for the individual elements of the game, while it looks okay, the music is a mixed bag. Sometimes it's fairly lively, and other times it's just, I mean, who composed this? What? Wait, who developed this? I thought it was LJN. Oh, right. Some of you out there might recall before Rare hit it big with the Banana Slammer, and to a lesser extent the Fight Frogs, they made a pile of licensed shovelware for a variety of publishers. Still though, for being the very first Spidey game on the Game Boy, this isn't terrible. I mean, there's no reason to play it today, aside from the dumb Dream Phone cutscenes, but hey, at least we're not starting off with some embarrassing Clone Saga level disaster. So I'm slapping Rare's Amazing Spider-Man with 2.7 cute lizard heads out of 5. Now, let's move on to the sequel, which, funnily enough, is where the embarrassing disaster part actually starts. Coming to us not from Rare, but the equally British Bit Studios, ASM2, despite still being on the Game Boy, attempts to get much more ambitious, for some reason. First, the story. Peter awakes from some type of stupor that I don't think is ever properly explained. Is he hungover, coming down from a coke high? When he then reads that his superhero persona has been out all night committing crimes. The Hobgoblin, of all people, seems to be behind this nefarious plot, so with bloody vengeance on his mind, Peter masks up and gets to work. This is all conveyed through some, if I'm going to be honest, rather ugly cutscenes. They're trying to emulate a comic book style, which I appreciate, but the Game Boy is hardly capable of producing such things, and while simple, I think Rare's portrait technique was the better artistic choice. Anyway, Spider Pete starts off in a very unruly neighborhood, and it's constantly being pelted by a barrage of Hobby's pumpkin bombs that simply don't know when to quit. This time around, Spidey can web swing whenever he wants, just not with the greatest of ease. In fact, swinging and attaching webs to things is super squirrely and works a lot like it does in Sinister Six for the NES, in that it barely does. After walking by a bunch of non-accessible buildings, you come across an electric fence that the wall crawler mysteriously can't wall crawl or jump over, despite it being quite low to the ground. With your options exhausted, you have no choice but to wander around until you figure out what the hell you're supposed to do next. So then oh crap, you suddenly find yourself stuck at the bottom of one of those famous 6-foot wide New York sinkholes. If you then peek your spider head into this creepy little hole, you find something, I don't know, a stick, a dildo, who cares? Now, okay, I can't jump out of this hole. Wait, so can I not crawl out of it? Wait, you can? How did I do that? Well, true believers, I never actually figured that out. I think you have to hold a button or press diagonally up. I always get it eventually, but it's still woefully unclear as to what the correct button combination is. So wait, hold up. Now I can go through the doors? Wait, is this a crowbar? Is Spider-Man, a superhero at level 4 strength, really running around Brooklyn just jimmying open doors? Okay, sure. Yeah, I'm down with that. Anyway, after fighting through regular everyday New Yorkers with their regular everyday flamethrowers, you eventually find yourself in the futuristic building that has this thing in it. I have no idea what it is, but it's the only other item I was able to find, so naturally, I assume it's a transmitter that disables the electrified wall? Oh, I guess it's not. What the fuck? So the missing piece to this puzzle is Hobgoblin, who, coward that he is, never takes any visible damage and always stays really high up and out of your reach. This does not mean you're just supposed to avoid him. No, you gotta take him down. And you do this by clumsily attaching a web line to his glider, which then sends you both crashing into the streets below in a fiery inferno. You then need to murder Hobby, grab his key, take it to open that last locked door, snatch some oil, commandeer his goblin glider, and then ride it over the electric fence. Like, why? You're Jumpman. Just spider over it. Anyway, that's just the first level. And while none of the others are quite as cryptic, they are still never as straightforward as you'd expect. You eventually meet up with Black Cat, the Lizard, in the sewers of course, and even Carnage. I mean, he is on the box art after all. That must mean he's the main villain though, right? Well, no, that's wrong. While he has a boss fight, you don't technically defeat him, and he doesn't even get his own cutscene. No, the main villain is old Quentin Gyllenhaal, who had spray painted a bunch of robots red and blue, and then sent them to try and get Spider-Man cancelled. However, once Fishbowl Face is defeated, the web slinger's name is cleared and the game is over, thank God. While I can appreciate Bits trying something new, this is too clunky, complex, and slow-paced, which is weird to say because once you know exactly what items you need and where, ASM2 could be completed in 20 minutes or less. So even though it's got more stuff than the first game, it's actually less fun and more frustrating to play overall. And that's why I'm proudly awarding it 1.9 dildo crowbars out of 5. Thankfully, we're now moving on to the Amazing Spider-Man 3 Invasion of the Spider Slayers. Okay. And it was also made by Bits? Fine, let's just do it. Obviously, judging by the title, this is a very, very loose adaptation of the storyline that ran in Amazing Spider-Man 368 to 373, with the villain being the hard to not laugh at due to his gangly bird feet and weird fleshy shoulder things, Alistair Smythe. Peter's doing his regular patrol of Central Park when he's accosted by the first and most copyright-infringing Spider Slayer ever made. Seriously, how did 20th Century Fox not sue? Following that, he's then terrorized by the giant metal bird thing, the armor guy, and then the 3 combiner insectoids. The finale is what you'd expect. You gotta beat Alistair in 2 rounds of awkward, repetitive combat. Now, unlike ASM2, which had a lot of puzzles, here each level has some type of gimmick. The first one has you knocking out a specific number of perverts in trench coats, the second is a frustrating vertical climb up the tallest building in the world, apparently, and the third is a warehouse with a bunch of flashing lights, that's awful, and the fourth an auto-scroller, etc, etc. This is an improvement from Bits' last attempt, but regardless of the change, the game can still be completed in 20 minutes. The cutscenes do look better as they use some art taken straight from Mark Bagley and are composed mostly of portraits, which is obviously a nod to Rare's earlier distinguished work. Graphically, the game has also seen a slight bump. Spidey is better defined, the animation is more fluid, and the backgrounds are reasonably detailed. Hell, even the fight in the sky with the giant claw is kind of impressive. Unfortunately, that's where the positives end. You still have to contend with shitty hitboxes, poor collision, weird superfluous stats, a plodding pace, and really finicky controls. This remains my main point of contention, and while I realize there's a learning curve here and that the GB was limited by its 2 buttons, that still doesn't excuse this from being pretty bad. It's actually a toss-up between which is better, this or ASM2, but for the reasons I already outlined, I'll begrudgingly give the win to Spider Slayers here, although everyone should be aware that I take no pleasure in this. 2.1 Smythe crotches out of 5. Okay, we are finally entering the colorful world of the Game Boy Color and its first radioactive spider game, Spider-Man. Yeah, technically this is a GBC version of the 2000 Neversoft classic, but differs in a few key areas. It also comes to us courtesy of Vicarious Visions, who go on to have a brief but passionate love affair with everyone's favorite wall crawler. We are also leaving the LJN era behind us, fuck yeah, and are now swinging into the far more greener pastures of Activision. You can't win them all, I guess. Alright, so whenever you make the leap onto a new piece of hardware, you expect a significant uptick in presentation, and thankfully Vicarious Visions does not disappoint. We're first greeted with a very appealing and moody opening intro, and goddamn, look at this title screen! The story kicks off with Peter gabbing on the phone with Aunt May. Sure thing, May. Get those wheat cakes ready. I'm gonna slob out and go goblin mode on them. And JJ, not missing a beat, literally screams, "Parker, get over there and get some pictures!" Now, JJ's a cheddar-headed goob, I'm not disputing that, but he's right, Peter shouldn't be using the company phone for personal calls. Parker then goes off to investigate an explosion, which then leads to a run-in with Venom, who seems to be going through it, as he's incredibly weak and scampers off as soon as you clean his clock. You come to find out through various twists and turns while fighting other baddies that Doc Ock has been experimenting on symbiotes, with Eddie having managed to escape Otto's morbid scientific curiosities. You eventually track down Science Squid, punch him in the face, which unleashes Carnage, whom you then also punch in the face, which then leads to a climactic showdown with none other than Dr. Carnage, or Carnage Puss, whichever you prefer. This is probably the only real link to the console game, but if you're gonna have one, then this is it. Once you get into the gameplay of Spider-Man on GBC, you can't help but go, "Oh, stunning." Yeah. Obviously, being free of the gray and green hell of the original Game Boy helps a whole bunch, but even as a standalone GBC release, Spider-Man impresses. Nice color palette, smooth animations, clean level design, good stuff. Progress is handled differently than anything we've seen so far. You have several maps like the street and rooftops, a pier, a subway, and so on. These are all vaguely connected from left to right and right to left, sort of like Simon's Quest, with you traveling between each one as the story dictates. A detriment to this approach is that you wind up seeing the same environments quite a bit, and it can get a little tiring when you're told you need to go all the way back to the pier before something can happen. And unlike, say, a Metroid, these levels are not as intricate or as interesting, but what's neat is that there are still some hidden upgrades if you take the time to explore. In terms of pacing, everything moves fairly fast. Spidey tears around at breakneck speed, web swinging is equally snappy, and it's easy enough to attack and defeat most baddies. Except for... yeah, these are some of the most annoying enemies I've ever encountered in a video game in a long ass time, I can tell you that for free. Trying to web swing over water or gaps unimpeded is an absolute shit shoot if these aerial predators catch even a whiff of your radioactive ass. Along with these birds, there are a few minor annoyances with what Vicarious Visions has made here. Control-wise, Peter Man feels very slippery. He retains a good bit of momentum whenever you start moving, so you can't exactly stop on a dime. Your jump is also not optimal, as you absolutely have to commit to each and every one, as you lack the ability to steer in midair. You can kinda sorta do it, but there's very little wiggle room, which doesn't feel good when you're intended to be controlling a superhero who's supposed to be super agile. This becomes a real issue in the pier level because it contains water, and sadly, Uncle Ben died before he could ever teach Peter to swim. Now, in general, you don't take fall damage in this, and no other levels contain as many pits, so this doesn't result in any other deaths, but as it is, these control quirks mar an otherwise rock-solid experience. Fortunately, the positives still manage to outweigh the negatives, and on the whole, this is a very encouraging debut for Vicarious Visions, so much so that they were given the opportunity to helm the console's sequel, Enter Electro, on the PlayStation the very next year. With that said, I'm giving Spider-Man 3.2 Goofy Peter heads out of 5. Our next game, Spider-Man 2 The Sinister Six, which should not be confused with Spider-Man The Sinister Six or Spider-Man Return of the Sinister Six, is actually a sequel to the last game, but just the GBC's canon, and not the console one, since the events between both were slightly different. Since the team down at Double V were busy with a number of other projects, Australia's Taurus Games were now handed the web shooters. Not familiar with Taurus? Well, they were an absolute dynamo in the early 2000s, putting out mostly solid portable efforts of franchises like Duke Nukem, Dead to Rights, Doom, and a couple of other Marvel properties. As you can surmise from the title, this is a tale involving the Sloppy Six, and it has no more depth than Doc Ock going, "Oh my god, I'm so sick of this dude kicking our asses, let's just grab that dumbass Parker kid, use him to lure in the spider, and, I don't know, shoot him in the head." Scorpion and Sandman then bust into May's place, can't find Peter, abscond with the old bag, and that's the plot. Save the person that makes the wheat cakes. The Sinister Six then challenge Spidey to a showdown at their secret base, which is located in the cursed lands of Coney Island.
Hey, yo!
The cutscenes have some nice little animated details, but I can't lie, they're a small step back from Vicarious Visions' prior work. Things just look a little off. Faces are weird, the art style is darker, and just less appealing overall. Thankfully, Taurus prioritized the in-game graphics instead. Everything's bright, backgrounds have more detail and color, animations are smoother, and there's some added comic book onomatopoeias. Just a lot of improvements from across the board. In regards to its structure, it does away with the interconnected maps from last time and focuses on straightforward linear levels, each with its own specific objective. For example, in the Coney Island stage, you have to find and unlock 3 gates before going tete-a-tete with Fishbowl Tet. Then you have to grab a key which opens the way to Sandman before having to explore a massive building, both inside and out, while crawling through elevator shafts and disabling force fields. I prefer this to the constant reusage of stage layouts we saw in Spider-Man 1. Oh, and the boss fights are better too, as they have just a little bit of sauce to them. You gotta avoid different fireball patterns from Mysterio and his illusions. Sandman can suddenly raise spikes through the floor, and Vulture drops, I don't know what those are. While it's nothing mind-blowing, they at least have some design to them than a lot of the other bosses I've already encountered. Best thing of all, the goddamn spider armor appears as a power-up. At first I thought it was like a weird white t-shirt or something, so you can imagine imagine my squeal of delight when I first picked it up. One minor thing that I notice in all of this, however, is that when you're just casually navigating the environments, and directly opposite from the Game Boy games where it was harder than it needed to be to reliably stick to walls, here it's far too easy. If even just 1 square inch of your spider cake touches any sort of surface, you instantly adhere to it, especially in cluttered levels like the amusement park. This can often lead you to taking a few inadvertent hits when you least expect them, so yeah, I wish this had been ironed out a little bit more. Aside from that, the only other real problem here is that starting from the 3rd level, it gets crazy hard. And this isn't due to combat or bosses, but the sheer amount of traps and hazards. Laser walls, stationary turrets, gun-toting enemies. It's just a lot for old Peter to have to contend with. I mean, he hasn't eaten a wheat cake in over 12 hours. He's running on empty. It's spectacular, amazing even, that tourists were able to pick up so much from what Vicarious Visions had started and improve on it in a lot of tangible ways. So that's why I find it's the better of the 2 GBC Spidey entries, but honestly, you can't go wrong with either. So, Spider-Man 2, the next return of the Revenge of the Sinister Six's Revenge, I heartily award you with 3.5 Spider Armors out of 5. We are now leaping into the brave 32-bit world of the mighty Game Boy Advance, which played a host to some of Spidey's most treasured handheld adventures. As previously stated, we covered a lot of these in previous episodes, so I'm going to be focusing on the 2 I have not, starting with Mysterios Menace. Fun fact, this was the game I completely drew a blank on when I had asked if there were any other releases in Spidey's gaming history, aside from Shattered Dimensions, where the talking crystal ball was the central villain, which I still apologize for forgetting. Speaking of memory, do you recall about 5 to 7 minutes ago when I said Vicarious Visions were busy with other things? Well, Mysterios Menace is one of those things, and its placement in the timeline is somewhat extremely confusing. This is now a sequel to the console games, but not the GBC games, so it follows up where Enter Electro left off, despite Vicarious having made one of those GBC titles. Never mind. Since we're now playing with advanced power, there was a big step up in graphical and audio fidelity, although the art style is rather subjective. It adopts a rendered CGI look, kinda reminding me of Web of Fire on the 32X, although not nearly as bad. Obviously, I and many others would have preferred traditional pixel art, but once you put some time into it, your eyes eventually start to adjust. And this isn't to say Double V didn't put a ton of work and detail into the visuals, cause they clearly did. All the background and foreground layers, animations, effects, and props all make for a very vivid setting, with each and every level feeling truly unique. Now, the cutscenes have their own distinct look when compared to the gameplay, but it hardly matters when they look this damn good. Vicarious's artists were clearly attempting to emulate Ron Lim's seminal 90s style, and they do a damn good job of it. Which is something I would be saying to you if they hadn't actually hired Ronald to draw them himself. Yep, actual comic book cutscenes made from the ground up for a game by an authentic comic book artist. It took until 2001, but we finally got there. Things pop off with a citywide crime spree which erupts in multiple areas, and for the first time you're given a map and choices about which mission to tackle in whatever order you like. This is a fantastic addition as you can easily revisit maps after you've attained specific powers and upgrades, giving it a light search action feel. The plot itself is nothing really special. You take out the web-slinger's rogues gallery, including goddamn Big Wheel, until you get to Mysterio, whom you don't actually defeat, as he just legs it. Why? Because it plays into a throwaway gag from the very start of the game. The plots of all these handheld adventures are probably the least important part, and honestly, I'm cool with that. As long as the cutscenes are looking clean, I don't mind a little simplicity in the storytelling. Now, even though the stages themselves are quite large, the Spider team at Vicarious managed to make them not confusing by filling them with recognizable landmarks and sections to break things up. A particular highlight is the pier level, which has already made a bunch of appearances in this video today, but in Mysterios Menace, half of it is composed of a glitzy casino barge that really livens the level up, and there's hidden things absolutely everywhere. Oh, like the spider armor, yeah! These maps by far have provided the most fun exploration I've had yet, and make Mysterios Menace engaging to play just based on that alone. Combat has also seen some additions. You can upgrade your webbing to be of the impact variety, which can then make short work of most jobber enemies, and a damaging but slow uppercut and a quick but weak sweep have also been slotted into Spidey's moveset. Jumping and web swinging also feel pretty much perfect, so I can earnestly say there's really nothing about the controls that seemed off or needed improvement. Even Mysterio's length is satisfactory. If you want to collect absolutely everything, it'll take you the guts of about 3 hours, which in my opinion is perfect for a handheld game. Mysterios Menace really surprised me. I recall looking at video of it years ago and going, no thanks, as the art style really doesn't do it any favors. Just goes to show that judging a book by its, you know the rest. If you've been hankering for some old school side-scrolling Spidey fun, I can't recommend it enough. So that'll be 4.5 big wheels out of 5. Last, but kinda least, is 2006's Spider-Man Battle for New York. This acts as a prequel to the events of Ultimate Spider-Man, which was released on consoles the year prior. Activision's sick game of shuffling developers in and out continues, as Taurus returns to the Spider-Verse with one last swing on the web. Since this was 2006, Battle for New York was also a cross-gen game, in that it released on both the GBA and Nintendo DS. Now, since the DS uses touchscreen controls for special moves, and it's annoying to record, I'll be focusing on the GBA, thank you very much. If there's any key differences though, I'll be sure to shout them out. As for the story, Norman Osborn injects himself with Oz, aka Goblin Juice, which causes him to rampage through the city like a Dollar Tree Hulk. Spidey, of course, has to put a stop to it, all while Silver Sable, Nick Fury, and others just manage to get in his way. It's probably the most elaborate narrative of any of the games I've covered, and it does the job, especially if you're a fan of the tone and writing of Ultimate Spider-Man. They both use the same visuals for the cutscenes, with Ron Lim returning, but the DS has voice speech.
Not my finest moment. He's quick for a guy his size. What can I say?
While the GBA has to make do with just text. And I don't mean it also has text to get the narrative across, I mean that's pretty much all it really has. For whatever reason, Taurus didn't or couldn't add any audio whatsoever to the GBA cinemas, which is messed up when you consider the GBC games had music, sounds, and even the occasional digitized voice clip. So, when it comes down to presentation, the dual screen obviously has an edge. Map design is also weird in the GBA version, as there's some issues with the perspective that are a little...
Oh, something is definitely wrong with this hallway.
Come on in!
And while the DS uses its trademark fugly little polygons for its characters and backgrounds, they are at least consistent, and don't make you feel like you're in an amusement park funhouse. The main issue that permeates both versions is just how repetitive everything is and how little controlling the Goblin brings to the table. He can throw fireballs, hang off surfaces, and that's pretty much it. He doesn't feel nearly as cool or have as many satisfying mechanics as, say, Venom did in USM. Mission-wise, you basically have to do a bunch of really similar things several times over. For example, as the Goblin, you go to the right while smashing cars, and then go to the right while smashing beakers. You then switch to Spider-Man and go to the right while putting out the fires started by the Goblin, and then go to the right while saving civilians, and you do this all in really similar maps, just as different characters. Thankfully, controlling Spidey feels really fluid, and he has a bunch of new moves to go along with another solid combat system, so no real issues there. Also, in a portable Spidey First, you can also accrue skill points while you're fighting through the stages, and then in between use them to individually level up certain aspects of both Goblin and Spider, so at least each character improves during the run-up to their inevitable showdown. It's kind of hard to explain, but there's a very paint-by-numbers, going-through-the-motions feeling with Battle for New York. Nothing here is terrible or even bad, it's just all a little underwhelming and mundane. I guess the DS version is slightly better, but I prefer good old face buttons instead of having to readjust for a touchscreen. And while it's nice that characters like Goblin, Sable, and Kingpin, who never got much play in any other portable title, finally pop up here, but that's just not enough to make Battle for New York a must-play. I wanted to like this one more than I did, but I gotta stay true to my mediocre roots, so that'll be 3.9 gallons of Goblin juice out of 5. Whew, it was really fun to swing through the history of Peter's portable products. And if there's something specific any of you out there would like me to get some pictures of, do let me know in the comments below or wall crawl up over to my Twitter. And thanks to all you webheads over on my Patreon who voted for these handheld games in my latest Edgelord poll. So, Excelsior, true believers, and I'll see you next time on the Mediocre Spider-Matt.